We will start off with the membership of the committee, if that's okay. So my name's Harpreet. I'm the chair of the Economies and Neighbourhood Scrutiny panel. I'll have to say everyone's names because we're all going to have different orders. So Ailey, if you just want to introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Ailey Ogden. I'm a co-optee of the Scrutiny panel.
Thank you. Sarah?
Sarah Clayton, Head of Housing Management with Kirklees Neighbourhood Housing.
Great stuff. Yusra?
Councillor Yusra Hussain for Batley West Ward.
Great stuff. Rob?
Rob?
Okay, Rob's on mute, but he's a cabinet member, so Councillor Rob Walker is a cabinet member. Chris?
Chris Friend, I'm a co-optee of the Scrutiny Committee.
Great stuff. Richard, Councillor Eastwood.
Hi, yeah, Councillor Richard Eastwood from Lindley Ward.
Great stuff, thank you. Peter?
Councillor Peter McBride, cabinet member responsible for regeneration.
Great stuff. Yusra, I can't remember if I said you or not. I've already done. Yeah, great stuff. Sorry about that. So I think I've already mentioned Helen as well. Did I?
No, Helen Gelder. Hello, everyone. I'm the Head of Housing Services with Kirklees Council.
Great stuff. Thank you, Helen. And thanks also to our colleagues, Lee Webb, who's our governance officer, and Olivia and some of our digital team who are helping in the background. Thank you very much. We've got some apologies today. So we've got Councillor Murgatroyd, Councillor Taylor and Andrew Bird who sent their apologies. Just moving on to minutes of the previous meeting. So those were held on the 9th of July. Are members okay to approve those minutes, or do you have any matters arising? Ailey, are you okay? Because I know you were at the meeting. Oh, sorry, Councillor Eastwood, did you want to... Sorry, Ailey, I'll just go to Councillor Eastwood first, yeah. You just unmute, Councillor Eastwood.
On mute. There we go. Yeah, minutes all fine and dandy with me. So
perfect. Thank you. Thank you. And Ailey, you were okay with them as well, weren't you? So you seconded. Perfect. Thank you very much. So the third item is about interest. So do any councillors have any interest to declare in relation to the agenda, or any panel members at all? No? Okay. There is a form. So if you do think that you might have some interest to declare, just fill in the form, and you can email that over to Lee. I'm just, I think Councillor Bolt is just joining the meeting as well. He's one of the panel members. So we'll welcome Councillor Bolt.
Hello. Oh, Peter again.
Nice to see you, Councillor Bolt.
Yeah.
So in terms of admission of the public, the meeting has been held virtually, so members of the public can view the meeting that way. In terms of deputations and petitions, we haven't received any deputations or petitions. Public question time, we haven't received any questions ahead of the meeting. Just to let members know, I did get an email from a resident who's commenting on our work programme, so I will mention that once we get to the work programme section, if that's okay. So we'll move on to the main item of the agenda, which is covering housing rent and support to council tenants and support to homeless households and rough sleepers during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we've got a couple of our colleagues, Helen and Sarah, who will be doing the main presentation, and they've got the colleague Lisa, who will be supporting both of them. So they will move on to a presentation which will come in about 3 sections, and we'll get members to ask any questions or provide comments during that time. Firstly, Helen, Sarah and Lisa, I do just want to pass on the panel's thanks. I know it'll have been a challenging time, difficult time for many colleagues. So thank you for everything that you've been doing over the past few months. So I will pass on to Helen and Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start off. So next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about the support that we provide to tenants in order for them to pay their rent during the COVID-19 pandemic. A key feature of our approach is to provide that early contact and support. We do know that our tenants are being hit, like a lot of citizens from Kirklees and wider, in terms of changes in their economic circumstances. This can be a reduction in their work hours, a reduction in income due to furloughing, for example, and also job losses. We have seen this reflected in the number of tenants who have made a new universal credit claim since April, and that's 502 tenants have made a fresh claim. We do make sure that we pick up people as soon as they fall into arrears or need any assistance with making payments. And we have a proactive approach to make sure that we're giving people the right advice and support, and that they're encouraged to make arrangements to pay their rent. We are also in a really good position in that we can make referrals into other services. So we're able to refer into the K&H Employment Support Team. They can provide assistance and support to tenants to get them back into the job market. So they can help give it advice around their CVs, job application forms, job searches, and interview techniques. And since July, we've referred 45 tenants into that process. We also have an in-house money advice team. They provide free, impartial and professional support to tenants who need support with their wider bills and managing their payments. So they can provide debt advice, they can provide negotiation processes with other debtors, and also make sure that people are accessing the right benefits. We have a calculation, and we know that in the first quarter, tenants benefited from that service by approximately £274,000. So that might not be money in their pockets, but it's about ensuring that their debtors are not pursuing some of those debts, and also increasing people's benefits claims where that's relevant. We also make referrals and join up. So where people need to link into the Stronger Families process, we also make sure that they're linked in to get that additional support. In addition, during the COVID crisis, we have been looking at a wider support for all our tenants. So from teams across K&H, we have been making calls to everybody who is over 70 years old and is a K&H tenant, and teams from across all services have been helping us to do that. That was making sure that we were doing some well-being checks, making sure that people were staying safe, particularly in the full lockdown period early on, and also making sure that they were referred into additional services, volunteers, and things like food parcels if they needed it. Next slide, please. So, as I've previously mentioned, we do know that there have been 502 tenants who've put brand new universal credit claims in since the beginning of April, and that makes just short of 4,000 tenants who are universal credit claimants. Whilst we have a lot of support and proactive work that we do with tenants during the rent recovery process, ultimately, we do have the option of taking court action to recover the property and end the tenancy. The courts have not been dealing with these cases since April, and that stay of possession proceedings has been extended until the 20th of September. So courts aren't doing that work as normal business. This means that we know we had 47 cases in the court process that we would have pursued action with had courts been open. And on average, those cases owe about £2,700. But we are still trying to make contact with them and ensure that they're putting in place arrangements to pay. We've also been doing proactive work with the courts and other support services to make sure that we are ready to go when the courts do open up for some of those historic cases. So we obviously monitor the arrears on a weekly basis, and my officers get presented the arrears cases weekly and daily. However, we have got a new payment pattern that has emerged since Universal Credit has started to roll out. So we do have a number of tenants who have their rent deducted from the Universal Credit claim, and then DWP pay that through to K&H, and that comes in on a monthly 4-weekly cycle. So we have a sort of low pattern in the 4-weekly cycle of the arrears, and last week the arrears were £3.1 million. And that compares with the figure in week 3, and I'll come on to that in a minute with the next slide. However, just to give assurance to members about what that looks like in the round, Q1, the collection rate was 98.14% of the total rent income. Next slide, please. So this slide just shows you that payment pattern. So we're showing the last 15 months of rent arrears figures. The red columns are the high point in the month, and the green columns show the point where the payment files from DWP come in. And so there's a significant drop every 4 weeks as those payments are made. You can see that the arrears does fluctuate over the year, and there is a slight increase in the pattern of the arrears, but we are generally confident that we are stabilising the arrears pattern, particularly considering that Universal Credit continues to roll out, and that puts a change on how people need to deal with their rent payments. And as you can see, the later months in terms of the changes in people's circumstances due to COVID and the wider economic factors. I'll take a moment at that point, Chair, and if you'd like to ask questions, I'll take those now before I hand over to Helen. I think you might be on mute. Sorry, Chair.
Thank you, Sarah. Gosh, it happens all the time. We never learn either. So sorry about that. I was just going to say, colleagues, if you want to ask questions now, can you please use the raised hand function? I'm a bit struggling with the format at the moment. So at the moment, I can't see anyone who's... Martin, did you want to ask a question? No. Okay, not at this stage. Okay, I can't see any hands, but I can't see half of you either. So I think someone would have spoken up by now if they did want to ask. Can I just ask about the arrears? So at the moment you're around 3 million, and you have been for some time. How many of those 3 million are at UC claimants? Do you know? Of that £3 million, how much would you put down to UC?
Yeah, there's about 54% of the arrears cases are on Universal Credit. Okay. Just short of 30% of arrears cases are due to pay full rent, and then the remainder are part and full-time housing benefit, so historic housing benefit cases. Okay, great stuff. And obviously you're going to have, at the moment, the evictions has been stayed for another month, so it has just been extended. How do you see that sort of impacting you? Because I saw in some of your papers you were working towards obviously the end of the month, and now we're looking at September. So how are you sort of planning that in, given that's been stayed for another month? And do you think that's the right amount of time? Should it have been longer? What do you think? So we have taken the opportunity to work really close with the judges at the local court to work on new protocols that they want to see in place. They've been really keen to ensure that people have had all the support that they need during this period of time, and particularly if there are any implications from COVID in those cases. We're working closely closely with partners like Fusion as well to make sure that we've got good support systems in place, and actually that's improved our working processes a little bit. So we've taken that time to really improve those working relationships to support tenants. I think there's been lots of debate nationally around when is the right time to open up for court action. I think what I would say is to give assurance really that the cases that we have got in the pipeline are cases that had accrued arrears before COVID, and that we were in the process of taking that court action before then. Obviously, if there are any implications for those cases due to the current circumstances, we would work really closely with those tenants and take that into account and have to report that through to the courts. But those are historic cases, and it would take some time for new and fresh cases to come through and get scheduled into the court system. But again, all those support and working with our partners to support people will be carried out to make sure that people have all the opportunities they possibly can before they get to that point.
Yeah, that was the other question I was just going to follow up, was just to say, will we be treating cases of possessions and evictions differently given what's going on with COVID? And we know, for example, the furlough scheme will be coming to an end, or at least changing, depending on what happens in the next month, which isn't very long away. And I mean, would you expect your arrears to be sort of increasing given some of the systems that have been in place from the state will change in the next month?
I think that's a bit of the unknown at the moment. We anticipate that as people come off furlough and as businesses and employers start to review their arrangements with their staff and employees, that other people will start to lose their job or reduce their hours, and again we will pick those cases up as quickly as we can, particularly where people are starting fresh universal credit claims. We need to make sure that they get into that habit of paying their rent as part of that process. But it is a little bit of an unknown at the moment, but all the forecasts are that the economic position is going to get worse before it gets better, and so our tenants will be impacted by that.
I'll just bring in Councillor Hussain.
Hi, thank you for that presentation. Just a quick question. I'm wondering if we're aware of, might not have this data, of how many people that are in council tenancy that have actually been furloughed, or whether it'd be a good idea to collect some form of data or send out some form of letters to tenants to kind of prepare ourselves before things start to potentially go, I don't want to really say it, but before organisations decide that those furlough schemes might come to an end, or they might not be able to carry those staff members on any longer. Is any pre-preparation we can do to support that, rather than let it get to a point where it actually happens and then we're picking up the pieces?
So I don't think we've got precise figures in terms of the number of tenants who have been furloughed. However, as an example, referrals through to the money advice team, they took 259 referrals in since the beginning of April, and of those 61 specifically were due to changes in people's circumstances due to COVID. So not a massive proportion, but obviously, each one of those is a household where they've been impacted, which is important. We will make sure that we keep getting the messages out to people that our support services are available, and we've been designing new leaflets, etc., to make sure that people do know and understand the services that we've got that are available to support them. I mean, we can look at whether we can contact people more proactively, but we generally get to know because they will be accessing benefits at that point in time. So we make really early contact with those people.
Thank you, Sarah. Councillor Hussain, did you want to do any follow-up? No, perfect. Members, are there any other questions at this stage? Ailey?
Hi, I'm not sure if this is within your remit, but I think it isn't clear about distinctions, or are there any data or distinctions around private tenants as opposed to council, well, K&H tenants, and do you have any information on that? But again, this may not be in your remit. It's just, I think we're likely to have a big problem, and to understand the scale of this in private tenancy. So obviously at the moment, I think people aren't allowed to go to courts for eviction, and there may still be landlords who still issue eviction notices. And also, are we aware of what kind of scale of debt is accruing in the private rented sector?
Thank you for that question. It is outside of my remit. I can talk particularly around K&H tenants, but I think in Helen's presentation, she'll pick up that in terms of some of the risks around what we know might happen as people come forward as homeless as a result of some of those debts. But I haven't got figures for you, I'm afraid. But Helen, I think, has her hand up. Thank you, Chair.
Yep, go ahead, Helen.
Thank you. It's just to say that we don't have the figures. I think we could contact our colleagues in Welfare and Exchequer who deal with the housing benefits or the local housing allowance for private sector tenants. It is clearly a concern that we do have in terms of when the stay of execution finishes, if you like, in terms of evictions, both from a social housing point of view and from a private sector housing point of view. Clearly, I am very worried about the number of cases or people or households who may approach the council for help, either preventing their homelessness or actually relieving their homelessness. We're struggling at the moment to cope with demand, so that is a concern, not just for us in Kirklees, but I think nationally as well. Hence the reason why there's a lot of discussion nationally on this agenda around ending of the suspensions of evictions and how we can cope with that to make sure that people don't end up homeless.
Very good point. Ailey, did you want to do a follow-up?
Yeah, I just wanted to check, because with the different services that have been outlined, are these available for private tenants as well? And what services are there for private tenants?
The services that I refer to specifically are provided within Kirklees neighbourhood housing, and so they're provided for tenants because they're paid out of rent money. However, there will be services across the borough that provide similar support for people in the private sector. So Citizens Advice Bureau, there are some local services like Fusion, etc., are there to provide that support to private rented tenants and owner occupiers if they fall into difficulties as well.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask one more question before we move on to Helen's slides? Were there any rent increases by K&H during the COVID period?
Not during the COVID period, but the government did make the decision back in 2019 that after 4 years of the social housing rents across the country having a 1% rent deduction, excuse me, that the government agreed that social housing could increase its rent by CPI plus 1%. So there was a decision before COVID was really on the horizon that a 2.7% increase would be made in line with government policy.
So would that 2.7% have come in just before COVID or during that period, or?
The rent increase would be from the beginning of April.
Beginning of April. And was that reviewed at all given the COVID situation? Or was there, I mean, obviously it wasn't because it sounds like the increase came in, but were there any discussions about whether the increase should come in or not?
I'm not able to answer that because those discussions might have been had elsewhere. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Sorry, it's probably something I need to follow up after the meeting. So we'll try and get some extra information. All right, thank you, Sarah. Ailey, your hand's still up. I don't know if it's from before. Yeah, it's great stuff. Okay, Helen, is it your turn now for the presentation?
Yeah, that's fine. If the presentation can go back up, please. Thank you. So what I wanted to do now is just to pull out some of the key points from the report that you've been presented with as part of the pack of papers, just to focus on homeless households, then to have a look at, in particular, rough sleepers who we've dealt with during the COVID period, and then just to touch finally on some of the work that we've been doing to help the health service, really, in terms of work there that we can do to help people. So first of all, just around homeless households, members I'm sure will be aware that from the initial lockdown, nationally there were restrictions placed on house moves across the housing market, except for those house moves that were deemed to be essential. That resulted in the council deciding, in accordance with those restrictions, to suspend the letting of council housing from the 25th of March right through until restrictions were eased, and we felt as an authority that we were able and ready to safely recommence letting of council properties to the 17th of June this year. Obviously that meant that no properties were being allocated and let during that period. In terms of homelessness, we have a duty to provide prevention and relief homelessness services as a council, and we have managed to maintain those services throughout the period of lockdown and do so still. Most of our staff, as staff across the authority, have been working from home and continue to work from home. However, we have managed to maintain a small presence in both Dewsbury and Huddersfield to ensure that any member of the public who approached those customer service centres and who were deemed to be roofless on the day and had no other way of contacting the service, we were able to facilitate access to services, and we were able to assess them and, if necessary, provide them with the support and temporary accommodation if that was also necessary and required. As part of our homelessness responsibilities, we do have to provide temporary accommodation to any household that is eligible for temporary accommodation, and again we have maintained that essential service throughout the period. We have seen a significant increase in the demand for temporary accommodation. Although in the first couple of months or so of lockdown, we actually received fewer presentations from people saying that they were homeless or threatened with homelessness. Of those people that did contact us to say that they were in difficulty, we actually ended up, sometimes because we weren't quite sure, we weren't able to see people, we've actually ended up taking the approach of accommodating people in temporary accommodation. So we've seen a significant increase in the number of households and people that are in temporary accommodation over the period. In the report, there's a table at 1.27 which gives you some information about the increase that we've seen. So, for example, in January this year, we had 123 households in temporary accommodation, and by the end of June, that had risen to 203 at the end of the month. Because of the increased demand, members may be well aware that most of the time we provide temporary accommodation through our own self-contained units of accommodation across the district. As those filled up and people weren't moving on because we weren't letting council accommodation, or there was no moves in the housing market, that accommodation silted up, if you like. So we've had to try and increase our portfolio of temporary accommodation during the period, which has resulted in the number of people we've had to place in bed and breakfast doubling, as you can see there on the slide, from just 37 in January up to 77 by the end of June. Obviously, bed and breakfast or hotel placements is not something that we would prefer to do because of the nature of those establishments and the fact that they're not self-contained, especially bearing in mind the COVID situation. I do want to reassure members of the panel, though, that all of those placements around temporary accommodation and bed and breakfast accommodation we worked very closely with our colleagues in public health and with the establishment providers to ensure that that we were carrying out those moves into temporary accommodation and out where it was feasible in a safe, socially distanced way, and all the appropriate PPE, etc., was provided to staff where it was necessary. Next slide, please. I just want to turn now to talk specifically about rough sleepers. Again, members may be aware from national press that government initiative was announced right at the beginning of lockdown, which was around ensuring that all verified rough sleepers were actually brought in. It's since been termed the Everyone In initiative, where government gave a directive to local authorities, if you like, to engage with rough sleepers in the district and to support and encourage them to come into accommodation during this period to protect them, but also to stop the spread of the disease of the virus as well. At the time, during that first week that we had to do that, we managed to engage and verify that there were 14 people across the district who were rough sleeping. We always do that in consultation and collaboration with partners across the district, and all of the 14 people we engaged with, apart from one, were happy to take up the accommodation, and we did rehouse them. We have continued to work with the one individual who, despite all our efforts, has refused the offer of support and accommodation, and we'll continue to work with that individual to try and encourage him to take accommodation from us. So throughout the period in total, because obviously that was the first week, but obviously as time's gone on, we have continued to do outreach work. We have a Rough Sleeper Initiative outreach team, which is a temporary team funded by Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, which has proven very successful in terms of the engagement and identifying rough sleepers. So when I wrote this, we'd had 40 rough sleepers that we'd identified. There's since in the last week been a further 2 that we've identified, so we're helping them as well. So at the moment, we've still got now 17 people still in temporary accommodation. We've managed in collaboration with 17 other rough sleepers to help them move on to more settled, more secure accommodation. And we've helped negotiate with the friends and family of 8 others to take their family or friend into their home and to help support them in terms of that accommodation. We continue through the Rough Sleeper team to provide the intensive support that this cohort of individuals need to encourage them to stay in. And I think we're quite proud so far of the fact that of all of those individuals that we have brought in, none of them have returned to the streets, and so that's a real positive, because we do know that in a number of other local authority areas, some people have actually given up on the accommodation and returned to the streets. So really, we're hoping that we will continue to move on the remaining people that are in temporary accommodation onto more secure accommodation and to help them to sustain their tenancies there. Move on to the next slide, please. So, as I mentioned earlier, we've been trying to work with our NHS and adult social care colleagues to try and ensure that we have been supporting them in terms of their work. As I mentioned earlier, in terms of the temporary accommodation services, we've worked closely with public health in terms of the government guidance, but we've also worked closely with partners to ensure that those rough sleepers that we have housed temporarily, that we've made sure that we've looked at their needs on a holistic basis and tried to ensure that we've got access for all of those individuals to a GP through the White House Centre, which is at Princess Royal in Huddersfield. We've also made sure that where appropriate, individuals have got specialist advice workers through CHART, for example, which is around substance misuse support. We've got contact with mental health providers as well in terms of making sure that people who are struggling with mental health issues can get that support. And of course, there's been the wraparound welfare support around food supplies as well to ensure that people could access food where they needed to, which was especially important in the bed and breakfast type accommodation in the early stages of lockdown. Everyone that we deal with as a homeless applicant, whether they're rough sleeping or one of our more general homeless applicants, is that we, in collaboration with that household or individual, work together to produce a personal housing plan. And we've continued to develop those personal housing plans with every individual household as we've gone forward. And we've made sure that we maintain regular contact and support with those individuals. That's mainly by telephone or online, text, etc., video calls, because of the restrictions around visits, etc. But we have managed to maintain that support, which we think has been part of the reason why we've been so successful in keeping people accommodated throughout the period. We've also, from a housing solutions point of view, helped work with NHS colleagues to try and ensure that there was capacity in the hospitals to deal with COVID-19 cases. You'd be surprised the number of people who, upon ordinarily needing discharge from hospital, indicate that they have nowhere safe to return to or nowhere suitable to return to. So we took the decision to provide a dedicated housing officer working alongside the hospital discharge teams so that we could very early on identify those individuals that needed some additional support in terms of where they were going to move on to when they were discharged from hospital. That's proved quite successful and is something that we would like to continue through the COVID period, but actually post-COVID as well, if we ever do get to post-COVID, because we think it's a really positive step forward and a really useful thing to build that relationship with the hospitals and the discharge teams there. In addition, we've worked with NHS colleagues and our adult social care colleagues in terms of developing the discharge to assess pathway, which was again around trying to ensure that people could return home from hospital or could move through the care system from one care provider or care provision onto something more suitable as quickly as possible. So the occupational therapists that we have working within our accessible homes service were redirected to help support that programme in the early stages so that we could ensure that people had the right adaptation and equipment that they needed to return home as quickly as possible. And as part of that, we were able to offer up our stock supply of stair lifts and hoists, which meant that we could move people out more quickly. And we were able to negotiate with providers to fit that equipment much more quickly than would normally have been the case. And again, I think that's really helped people to get home either from hospital, and has also really helped those people who were struggling and perhaps had an end of life plan, and we were able to sort of speed things up for them as well to make sure that the end of life plans were put in place as speedily as possible. So I think that's most of the key points from the paper, but as before, I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Helen. I think we've got Councillor Bolt, so I'll just bring him in first.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks for that, Helen.
Okay.
And through you, Chair, I mean, can we congratulate Helen and the team on that? I mean, throughout the life of this scrutiny panel, we've discussed the issue about rough sleepers on a number of occasions, and with the exception of one person not engaging, as we heard, I think it's a really positive step that through the adversity of COVID, we have managed to accommodate over 40 rough sleepers. And hopefully, from what Helen was saying, those people are being supported so that they may not return to that, that lifestyle. Again, one of the things that we have touched on before, Helen, do we know of the numbers of those rough sleepers, if any, who were of a military background, veterans or anything? Because that's something that we've spoken about.
Yeah.
And what's happening with the one person? You know, we can't lose sight. If there is one person who, for whatever reason, hasn't accepted the offers, I mean, he said chose not to. Yeah. Is there anything that we can do to overcome that hurdle so that Kirklees has a zero rough sleepers, which I think would be something we could all be justifiably proud of? Yeah.
I should have known, Councillor Bolt, that you'd ask those questions about the armed forces. And actually, I did get the figures, but only this morning, just so that I could tell you them. in terms of the 40 armed forces, there were none of the 40 had an armed forces background at all. 7 of the 42 now, because as I said earlier, we had 2 more cases just this last week. 7 of the 42 were people who were not eligible for assistance, so had no recourse to public funds or didn't have settled status. However, 7 of those we've 4 of those 7 have now we've managed to get settled status for them, and so we've been able to help. So we're continuing to work really closely with those remaining individuals to try and make sure that they've got the support that they need. One of the 42 was under 25 years of age, and the remainder were over 25. And just out of interest, 22 of the 42 had got an offending background of some sort. What we weren't able to sort of pull out was how many of those individuals had got an alcohol or drug misuse issue. But we do know from the work that we've done through the support with Chart that is something that cohort of people have taken up support on. So I don't know the numbers, but we do know that some of them did have those issues that they were trying to cope with and deal with. Was there another part of your question, Councillor Bolt? The other person, yeah. So that one person, that individual is in North Kirklees, and the outreach team that I mentioned, our own Rough Sleeper outreach team, continue to try and engage with that individual, continue to go out and try and encourage him to come in. Other frontline workers in the area as well are aware of him, so our community support officers and the police, etc., and also the outreach teams that we work in partnership with from the third sector. So I think it's a sort of a combined effort, if you like, from all of us to try and ensure that we do encourage him to come in. We're not sure whether, as winter, the colder weather comes, whether that might prompt him to come in. Certainly over the summer months, he's been very reluctant to take up that offer. But we won't give up. We're not complacent. We'll keep trying.
Thanks, Helen.
Okay.
Great stuff. Thank you, Helen. Is other members? Does anyone else want to ask a question at this stage? No, I can't see at the moment. I think I'll just ask a couple of questions then. Yeah, Helen, Sarah, I think, was it Lisa who's on here as well? I mean, that presentation, it just shows you what the team, and obviously Sarah's previous presentation, just show what the team have been doing, and it's really positive. It really is. So, congratulations to you and your team, and it just show by putting that holistic support in what a difference that can make. So really, really well done to you and your team. And I know it will have been a difficult and challenging time for all of you. Firstly, can I just ask, there's always obviously been an outreach team in Kirklees, but it's been more third sector based. We've got our own outreach team at the moment, and it appears that that's made quite a bit of difference in terms of the numbers. Is this something that you think we can continue? Because it sounds like we've had specific funds in place for that might run out. Is that something that might be viable to keep going longer term?
Well, you're right. The MHCLG funding that we've got was for last year and for next year, and actually in the next year from we've actually got additional support there to keep that funding going, but it is temporary. What I'm actually doing at the moment is putting together a business case, if you like, to sort of show the impact that team has had, so that if MHCLG funding does cease, that we can put a case together to continue that funding through council resources. I think government's ambition around ending rough sleeping may well mean that we do continue to get government funding for this area of work. And obviously, wherever we can get additional funding into the authority, that's what we will continue to do. But I would like to see the Rough Sleep Initiative team being retained. I think it's been a really positive addition to the service. And we're not doing it on our own, but it is coordinating and working very much with the third sector and other public sector services. So it's really valuable service.
Yeah, I mean, quite clearly it is. And obviously we've got cabinet members on here that I'm sure are listening to Helen's pleas there about trying to keep the team going. I mean, quite clearly it's made a major, huge difference. I mean, and moving on from that, Helen, I mean, obviously, with that is the funding element about trying to keep that going and making it a priority so we can keep funding it. I mean, in one section of the report, I think it mentioned that during the COVID period, there was 12,000 that was provided, but obviously we've spent about 40,000, so there has been some gap. But I mean, how's that been? And I know it mentions also the additional 24 million that the council has received from MHCLG, which some of that is supposed to go towards rough sleeping as well. But obviously that's going to cover everything as well. The council needs to cover. So how's that been?
Yeah, we've actually now received the £12,000 that they gave us for the rough sleeping, which is great. It's come into the bank account. But as you say, it's not enough to cover the whole cost of what we're trying to do. One of the big impacts of us using bed and breakfast accommodation more than our own temporary accommodation units is that the council loses out in terms of housing benefit subsidy loss, because we can't claim back the full cost of the housing benefit that we have to pay to tenants or to residents. So that element has been flagged up, and the Eamon Croston, the Director for Finance, is well aware of that and understands the impact of the additional costs in terms of that overall 24 million. So it's something that's flagged and is being looked at. In terms of additional resources, we have just put forward a bid also to the Next Steps Accommodation Programme funding announcement from MHCLG. In the first bid is just for this financial year, so we're just putting forward some additional resources to help fund the increase in accommodation for rough sleepers between now and the end of March next year, which will cover obviously the winter period as well. So we've put in a request for some additional revenue funding for that. And we've also put in a bid for some additional, to actually acquire a couple of properties that could be used to help with the move on of the rough sleepers from their temporary units into a more permanent, well, not permanent, but a more interim based accommodation. So again, we're hoping that that will provide us with some additional accommodation for rough sleepers as well. So I don't think we've got the full costs covered, but we are seeking to bid for funding wherever we can, and we flagged the impact of the cost of homelessness.
Yeah, and I guess this points to the sustainability of funding, nationally as well as locally. So, obviously, it sounds like the 12 came in reactively. So there was upfront costs, and then the 12K is coming, and that doesn't cover all the costs anyway. So, that's fair. Members, is there any other questions that you want to ask at this stage? No, I don't think there is. There was one other thing I wanted to. The only other thing I wanted to ask you was about. In terms of no recourse to public funds, you said that was seven people. Yeah. I'm quite. Were you expecting more? Because 7, I'm quite surprised by that number. Actually, I thought you might get more numbers through.
I think the Everyone In initiative was around verified rough sleepers.
Okay.
So if they were verified as sleeping out on the streets, then we would help them through that process. I think there are many more individuals across Kirklees who don't have recourse to public funds, who might have been staying with friends or relatives, etc. We did have 1 or 2 people coming to us and saying, can you please put me up in temporary accommodation now, because and if the household that they were living with had said they were going to kick them out and they would be on the streets, we would have picked them up. But we've worked with the families to make sure that wherever possible, people have stayed where they are rather than us having to provide that accommodation. Okay. So yes, I think you're right. There's probably a lot more. We know that there are, because we know there are a lot of failed asylum seekers and others that are in the country that don't have recourse to public funds.
Yeah, of course. Okay. And then the other thing I just wanted to ask you about, you said 22 of the 42 were had an offending background. History, sorry.
Yeah.
Do you know if were those quite historical sort of offences, or were they more recent? Because I know prisoner release was potentially going to be an issue with temporary accommodation as well.
Yeah, I think that they were probably, to be honest, I don't know what the dates of those were, but in terms of the prisoner release, you'll probably be aware that there was, that in order to control the outbreak of COVID in prisons, they did do the early release system. But we had very few actually released into Kirklees, and they weren't released unless they had somewhere to go to. So it wasn't that people would be released from prison onto the streets. And then there was, later on in the process, there was an initiative put in where the prison service themselves identified temporary accommodation for people to move into. And then we helped work with them in the 56 days where we're to prevent homelessness to find more suitable move-on accommodation.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. All right, thank you, Helen.
Okay.
Okay, is there another section to the presentation as well, or is?
Nope, that's it.
Okay,
Yep.
sorry, I thought you said
Yep.
I thought you said 3
Yep.
things. So members, any more questions? No, I mean, I just, again, I think probably on behalf of members, just want to say, thank you very much for what you've been doing. I think, this is a very good model, actually, and at this very difficult time, it's shown how you've been able to come together and do something quite, quite superb here. So, congratulations to all of you, really. Just a couple of things for us to, thank you very much. A couple of things for us to pick up, I think, were around just something around the housing rents increase. Lisa, if we could maybe try and get some more information on that. And then I think Ailey made a very good point, some very good points around private rented sector, and perhaps that's something we'll try and get some more information on the specific things that Ailey asked for, but it might be something that we want to focus on in terms of our work programme as well going forward, and perhaps do a meeting around the private rented sector as well. But thank you very much, Helen, Sarah, and was it Lisa? Sorry, I can't quite see you. Thank you to the three of you, and you can go now if you want to. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks a lot. So members, just wanted to go on to our work programme. Do you have any comments on the work programme? And what I'll do is I'll just try and get my email up regarding the resident who contacted us about the work programme. He had some thoughts that he wanted to share with us. So I will just pull that up. Sorry, I'm just pulling up my email. So if anyone does have the hand up, I can't see it right now. I'm guessing no one does. The only other thing I wanted to mention about the programme was we had a tackling poverty on our work programme. I will be receiving a lead member briefing, but just to let you know that the tackling poverty action plan is actually going to corporate scrutiny because they're covering the tackling inequalities action plan. So the two reports will go to corporate scrutiny rather than come to us. I will get a lead member briefing, and we will try and look at perhaps what we want to focus on in terms of that plan, but it is going to corporate scrutiny first. Martin, Ailey's asking a question about, is there any plan for an update on the blueprint? We can certainly ask for an update on that. We had a bit of a report last week about the town centre plan. Sorry, not last week, at the last meeting we had an update on the town centre plans, but certainly we can ask for a further update on the blueprint. Was there anything in particular about the blueprint, or did you mean overall, Ailey?
I'd say overall, I think last time we were, I think particularly looking around certain areas, but I think just, yes, in general around the blueprint and unless I missed it, any sort of, an overview about the outcomes of consultation.
Yeah, I think we can, in terms of the town centre consultation, do you mean, Ailey?
Yeah, but I might have missed it. So I think it was July 2019 that we sort of heard about the plans for consultation, and I'm not sure if we got anything about what the results of the consultation for the town centre and the blueprint were. Okay, I'll just double. I'll double check that, Ailey. I thought we had I thought Simon had gone through the consultation responses, but let us just go through the we'll go through the previous meetings and just double check that. And if not, if not, we can get that sent to us as members anyway, just to make sure that you've got copies of those. Lee, is it all right just to make a point on that, because I think they've released the report on the consultation?
Yeah, I think they probably have. I'll chase that and check. It was going back to last year, wasn't it? Yeah, we'll double check that for you, Ailey, about the consultation response.
The other thing is, if you just give me 1 second, I'll try and pull up what the resident contacted me about in terms of the trying to multitask. So I will just get that. So we had a resident contact us about the work programme, and there were a couple of points that he wanted us to perhaps consider. One was around active travel. Obviously, we did a little bit of this at the last meeting, where we looked at some of the active travel programme around the town centre plans. What he's asked is to look at the effectiveness of measures to change behaviour and undertake consultations, as well as the current and planned infrastructure. I know, Councillor Bolt, you raised this at the last meeting as well. And he's looking at interventions to create reserved areas for cycling in town centres and residential neighbourhoods, and the need to create effective consultation with stakeholders. And you referred to the experience of the London Borough of Waltham Forest in introducing low traffic neighbourhoods. Then he went on to say the implications for Kirklees of the recent changes in government policy announced on gear change, a bold vision for cycling and walking, is particularly important in setting new design standards, which also include details of enhanced powers for councils to establish low traffic neighbourhoods. Have we still got Rob Walker on, or is he? Oh, Councillor Walker.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, well,
yeah, sorry.
I know it's kind of your.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't speak when I was the introduction was happening. I am having problems with my microphone, but I think I'm working again. Yeah. Well, both Peter, Nahid, and myself have been looking at this quite a lot, really, over the last couple of months. So, yeah, I think it would be an appropriate topic on which officers could report back in terms of the progress that's been made.
Great. Okay, that's good news then. So we can try and bring that forward. So if we speak to yourself, Councillor Walker, and officers about when to programme that in, that would be helpful.
Sorry to put in again,
no,
I don't know if Peter wants to say something about this, because he's been very much involved.
In Waltham Forest, the deputy leader of Waltham Forest was here doing a critique of Kirklees only, roughly a year ago. Anyway, cut a long story short, they were very brave in bringing in measures to reduce traffic other than public transport in huge areas of Waltham Forest. That required them to be very brave. However, then they shoved the main traffic onto very specific roads. Now, what they were sort of inviting the members of the Transport Committee to look at was, would you dare do something like this, and could you live with the consequences? And I think what they saw there was, yes, you could. However, one thing that they did show us was the area they covered was very flat, which made things a bit easier. And it did lead you to believe that in parts of West Yorkshire you could do things like this. And I think it would be sensible to try and experiment somewhat. But we have to be, I think, ideally in the flatter part of West Yorkshire or Kirklees.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah,
go on, Councillor Wack, and then I'll bring in.
I am planning. Yeah, sorry. I am actually planning informally to go down and have a look at what they've done down there as well within the next couple of weeks. So that would be quite interesting. Yeah.
Brilliant. I mean, this resident has also suggested that as a panel we should go and visit, which, you know, obviously when appropriate, and perhaps that's something we can do. So let's bring in Martin and then Ailey.
It's all right. I'll defer to Ailey. She looks to be saying what I was going to do, that we let's get away from that hills are a barrier. We now we've got more and more e-bikes coming through. The cycle to work scheme has been massively increased up to about £2,500. So you can buy an e-bike through your wage packet. And as I've said before, we should be looking at getting these places so they can be charged up at work and things. So the hills have never been a barrier to cycling around here. That's why this area has produced so many good cyclists. What we have to do is to You shake your head, Peter. You know, for the last 70 years, Kirklees has produced world-beating cyclists, and that's because we have hills.
Is that why of all the traffic movements, 1 in 1,000 is by bike? Is that why?
You keep coming out with these statistics, Peter, which so far you still haven't justified. The one where you said 0.01% of the population cycled. That's not true in Kirklees.
And what's the pattern of the traffic, Martin?
Well, if you don't want to encourage cycling, that's fine. But those of us who do, will get on with it. Over to you, Ailey.
Yes, Ailey, go ahead.
I think just on the point about minority cycling, then I think in the 50s it was the vast majority of the UK was like the world leading producer of bicycles and highest bicycle use in the world, I believe. But I can check that, and I think there are some interesting statistics that I can check as well. That I think it's the vast majority of car journeys are under 0.8 miles. So 0.8 miles, and I think that's probably not too much. I'd say, this comment about Waltham Forest being very flat and Kirklees not being flat, it's very valid, and I think I agree with Councillor Bolt on this, that we shouldn't see. I've cycled a lot in Europe, and I see lots of particularly old people overtaking me, going up hills on their e-bikes. So I think as having the infrastructure, but also the financial arrangements, which I think not just cycle to work schemes, could be a solution for that. But I think in addition to that, there's also a big point about infrastructure as well. So the infrastructure for e-bikes, but more generally, just having a cycle lane going up the hill. I cycled, I know that Brighouse is out of our remit, it's stopped somewhere on the way, but I cycled there the other day, and cycling up those hills, you don't want to be wobbling about unless you are, you don't want to be wobbling about up the hills. Point is, just having a cycle lane on those hills, and maybe having someone who actually cycles looking at where we need these cycle lanes, would also reassure lots of people that if you're going to huff and puff up a hill, no one's going to come and run you off the road. So I think, e-bikes and strategic cycle lanes is a way to showing people that it is possible to cycle up a hill.
Thank you, Ailey. So Martin has said something in his chat. The motorcycle barriers on the Bradley Greenway are completely counterproductive, preventing cyclists from using them and bellying the whole point of the Greenway. The motorcycle problem needs to be dealt with by enforcement, not barriers. Okay, thanks for that, Martin. I think
as it says there, Chair, that is from a 2006 review. Peter mentioned reviews. That's from a 2006 review of Kirklees facilities by the well-known transport correspondent, former member of Cycling England, Christian Wolmar. I've just found, I searched on my hard drive, Christian Wolmar came to Kirklees at my request and did a review, which I can share with the panel, because that comment there is still valid, and greenways are being built in Kirklees with what they call motorcycle barriers, big wooden poles, which are prohibitive to people using. And there's a chap in Batley that's had this on social media. He tries to take his child on a tag-along bike to school, and the child ends up stuck on the road because of these barriers, which are still there 14 years after they were condemned by Cycling England.
I remember you brought this up last month as well, Councillor Bolt. So, the very fair points. I think it does show that we probably need to do another sort of meeting around this and what the resident has suggested, and everyone seems happy to do that. So, Ailey, your hand's up again, or was it from before? No. It's just from Yusra, did you have your hand up for a minute there? Yes, Councillor Hussain.
Yeah, just briefly, I'm not against the idea of having cycling lanes as such. I think it's a good way forward in terms of, getting the public to be more healthier. Look, people are looking to change their lifestyle, given the fact that, with this COVID coming along. I just think maybe my colleague has been misunderstood. I think it's more a case of Waltham Forest might be a very good example of cycling lanes being adapted there, but we've just got to make sure that it's fit for purpose around the area that we're in. So it's not that anyone's against the idea. We need to be more mindful, make sure it's fit for purpose in the area that we all are representing, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone agrees it's something we need to sort of explore further, and I think you make a very fair point, Councillor Hussain. The other thing I just wanted to add was walking. Is just we need to make sure that the walking element isn't forgotten in all of this as well. So we will bring this to a meeting of the panel, particularly what the residents suggested as well. Rob, Councillor Walker, did you want to say anything else at this stage? It seems you're happy enough for us to discuss this also further and perhaps take on the points that Ailey and Martin raised there as well.
Yeah, as always, I would be very keen for this topic to come to the panel. I think it's really important.
Brilliant. That's brilliant. Thank you, Rob. Okay, so we'll do that, and maybe we'll try and look in a little bit more detail. Perhaps we get someone up from Waltham Forest virtually to have a chat with us as well. That might be useful. Okay, the other point that the resident mentioned was air quality. He's asking about issues related to public transport vehicles. He's asked about licensing of taxis and private vehicles in relation to a cleaner fleet, and also he's asked about the bus industry responding to pressures to introduce cleaner vehicles. Now, we are expecting an update from the air quality team. We're just trying to work out when we can put it in. It'll probably be October or November. We're edging towards November just because the October agenda is looking fairly busy, but does that sound of interest to people as well in terms of what's been suggested? Yep, sounds like that's okay. So we will go back to the air quality team with the suggestions there also. The final point is, I've said the November meeting. We've currently got a date in for November. Lee, can you remember what the date is currently for November?
I think it's currently the 19th of November.
19th of November. We are just having to change the date for that, and that's primarily because I've got a training session booked in as well. So we're hoping to just go for a date in December. So we had said the 2nd of December, Lee?
8th, I think, potentially.
Sorry, 8th of December at 2 o'clock. So hopefully that's okay with everybody. So we'll cancel the session that's in for November and pop it in for December. So like I say, hopefully that's all right with everyone. Councillor Hussain, you've still got your hand up. I don't know if that's from before or I think it's from before. Okay, brilliant. All right, well, Councillor Walker, did you? Yeah,
just to say, if you do meet on the 8th at 2 o'clock, I'm not going to be able to join you because I've already got an important meeting booked in then.
Okay.
More important than us, Rob?
Unfortunately, Martin, yeah, it looks like it. Yeah.
So the only thing I'm thinking, Councillor Walker, is if we're discussing your something relating to your sort of remit, maybe we could do it earlier in the day if you've got time as well. But we'll.
Looking at that day, it's just 2 till 3 where at the moment I've got a meeting, I think.
Oh, okay, so we could perhaps do it a bit earlier then. Lee, is that okay?
Yeah, if members are happy for a session, that's fine.
Yeah. So what should we say, about 10 o'clock or?
Yeah.
Actually, no. Sorry, I tell a lie. I've got a meeting in the morning as well, but I could do it. The other thing is I could try and move the other meeting, but I do know there will be a lot of different people going to it, so it might be quite difficult to move it.
Okay, so we could go for maybe 12 o'clock. It's a bit of a random time, but we can try and do that.
12 o'clock I could do.
Yeah, perfect. We'll do that. So we'll go for that if that suits everybody else. Great stuff. Ailey's asked, do we plan to try again with a walking and cycling tour? I would like to do that, Ailey, absolutely. I think it's just figuring out I mean, we can certainly get in touch with officers again and just figure out when would be appropriate to do it. Given
the restrictions on active travel and that have lifted a lot more. I think British Cycling are now allowing events up to 600 people to take place. So we're not in that category. Certainly, half a dozen of us or so that we had should be able to get out, and I think it'd be good to do so, Chair.
Yeah, no, I agree. So is that all right, Lee, if we speak to officers and see? Just mindful, obviously, I know everyone's really busy at the moment, but we'll certainly get a date slotted in for that as well. And it should be fun. So hopefully I can get on a tandem bike with someone. Bike for a long time. So, and Councillor Baltz asked about e-bikes. I think we were looking at sourcing e-bikes previously as well. So if we can get hold of some, we will certainly try to do that. Should be fun. Okay. All right. Is there any more questions, or is everybody okay?
I mean, if I can volunteer, Chair. I mean, if we're doing tandems, I'll take Peter with me because he's been taking me for a ride for years, so I'd like to reciprocate.
I'll take you on another form of transport, Martin, which you'll really find helpful. It's more fundamental. It's called walking.
Walking, yep.
It's a form of transport that everybody uses, not this 0.01% of the total population.
Well, we've got both of them in, so we've got walking and cycling, so we can definitely fit both of those in. So we'll certainly do that.
Don't worry, we'll include walking, Peter. You'll be walking when we go uphill.
All right. I was a good walker. Always been a good walker.
Oh, there you go. Well, there you go. We're sorted. Okay, then. Councillor Eastwood, did you want to say something? No, great stuff. All right then, everybody, thank you very much for joining the meeting, and look forward to seeing you at the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye everyone.